Okay. Oh, we're starting now?
Oh yeah, we started a few minutes ago.
Oh, oh, wow. All right. So I'm Jesse Lamb. I have been doing product in various capacities for almost as long as you've been doing design since we've sort of came up together. I had a circuitous path or whatever, that's not the word, but whatever, where I was in law and I was in tech and I was in law and I was in tech, but I've been the last 8 years or so paid in the capacity of a product manager. But I'm really more of a jack of all trades than a master of any. And I think as a product manager, that helps me sort of bridge that gap in, well, that was a plosive gap in understanding and help people sort of come together. I hope you can edit that down.
Oh yeah, so Jesse and I have been working together like since college, basically, and we've done a few things together. So we sort of have a different rapport maybe than most people. In fact, we've lived together as well with our wives, which was a weird time, but
The before
um,
time.
there was no swapping or anything. So.
God. Although
Um,
somebody did have that dream that we won't get into.
Oh, at least I was honest. I mean, I can't control my dreams. Um, yeah, so whenever I'm doing something, I always want Jesse's feedback on it because he's usually one of the more thoughtful, insightful people that I talk to.
I think the most relevant thing that for Meetup, uh, the and I don't think this is proprietary information, but like where it's stickiest and where it provides the most value is with people who are going through a big life change. So they're having kids, they've moved to a new area, they've entered a new industry. And it's not because you're a weirdo or you're an outcast because that you don't have those people, but the idea of finding your people wasn't writ large, it was writ small. This is something that maybe my friends from college aren't going through right now. So I need to find the people that are going through this thing and perhaps are at a similar point with it or farther along. And I don't think there's anything uncool about that. I think it's the nature of you don't always like come along with the same cohort and you have divergent interests and whatnot. To the extent that is like applies here is like what are the goals that people are bringing, and I think we could go a couple of different directions. We could index on Instagram on what you think was successful for in the product and what you were kind of fighting against, or we could go very specifically like you have a much narrower social object, like social object in the sense of ostensibly the social object within your project and Instagram is a photograph. But the like when you think about a community and you think about like the norms of the community, what you're coming to do, whereas where Instagram is a general tool that can be used for all sorts of different types of things. I when you what little you shared of the project, it reminds me of more like something like Stack Overflow, where you have people who are coming at various points in their journey and becoming a better developer.
Hmm.
And I know one thing they've struggled with is what does it mean to be like inclusive of people who are at various points in their journey. And I don't think they've cracked that nut yet, but I think they're farther along in their pursuit than perhaps anybody else. And if you look at the pre-Stack Overflow days with like expert exchange and all that madness,
You mean
it's
expertsexchange.com.
terrible, terrible, unfortunate name. The
They put a hyphen in there eventually so that people would clarify. Actually, that's true.
God,
It's a true story.
I think you can draw a lot from there because I think one of the failings for you was Instagram is a general tool where people are coming with a general thing of whether it's they want to share pictures of their baby, whether they want work on the photography, whether on the other side they want to just pass time. Whereas I think one opportunity you have is being a specific community tool and
Hmm.
not just specific to photography and not even perhaps specific to getting better at your photography. You could go in what kind of photography, or you could go on like I want to work on my composition, or I want to be able to shoot like in different scenarios, like I want to do portraiture, I want to do whatever. Like there's a lot of different directions you could go, but I think what's important And one thing you have the benefit of baking in from the beginning is answering the question, what are people coming here to do? And that you may have uh, different types of users with different goals, but understanding what those are and kind of bake those in to what those interactions and engagement looks like. It may not be, you may not have like some binary thing like a like. It may be that you have some kind of, you give whatever the, I'm a terrible photographer so I can't list them all out, but you say like the different types of things that a photo might succeed or fail on, and let people,
Composition, exposure,
yeah, like let
focus.
people rate it on that. Or
Yeah.
maybe you want to like force people towards qualitative feedback. And then there's the follow-up question. We've talked about this a little bit offline. Do you want to fall into the dribble? Like, do you, how much does it feel like dribble? And I think one of the things that dribble, and going way back, Forest failed on, was very quickly it became a place to show off and demonstrate, and it wasn't really a place to get feedback and get better at your skill or your craft.
Yeah.
And that may be a good thing or a bad thing. It just all depends on what your goals are. And I think you, as the benevolent creator, or seed of what this thing can be, you have a lot of power at the outset of establishing, what are we coming here to do? What kind of things are we going to tolerate or not? Are we going to be inclusive or exclusive? And those aren't good or bad in any absolute sense. But you can, by baking in the community affordances of here's what people are coming to do, I think you can stave off a lot of that, like everyone asking the same question over and over again, or everyone giving like just pure I like this, don't like this, which is not very useful if you want to get better. You might be able to shape that from the outset, so that it's more, it comports with the goals of what people are bringing. Now, we haven't, aside from the idea of getting feedback, we haven't really like teased out what those goals are. So it would be helpful, like, what are you imagining are the types of users who are coming, and what problem are they trying to solve when they come there? It may be inspiration. It may
Mm-hmm.
be, I want to, they may actually look at these things as a resource to answer a question in the vein of Stack Overflow. Or it may just be very much about those interactions, that these aren't supposed to be evergreen durable. It's like, I put up this photo, I want to know something about it. And is exposure a goal? If exposure is a goal, what does it mean in the context of something that's more narrowly tailored? These
Yeah.
are all things that I would not set in stone, but I think things like lay something that you can falsify and have a chance to evolve, and narrow that at least a little bit at the beginning, and then be willing to be surprised at what people are actually doing with it.
Like maybe there is sort of some kind of invite thing. Like I don't think I want to be the gatekeeper into the community, like where it falls to me or maybe someone I appoint, like as a dictatorship, you know. But the nice thing about an invite model is like if I invite you and give you, you know, 3 invites, well now you probably know some talented people, and then you can, you know, choose who to send those to, and so it can kind of grow a little bit more organically than it would otherwise. So that's something that I've been thinking about, along those lines of that
Well,
exclusivity.
and it's hard to evaluate the value of those mechanics in a vacuum. I think it's helpful to understand, again, like what what are your goals? Like 5 years from now, what impact do you want your project to have in the world, and what do you imagine are the goals of the people who are coming to it? Because I could coming, like, you could go either way on that, but I could see the like quality barrier could very much be solved not by saying you're in or you're out as some threshold question, of saying, how do you self-identify? Like,
Yeah.
is this something you do professionally? Is this something, like, for me selfishly, my photography goals over the next few years are, I have a 5-month-old daughter, like me actually, and I bought a camera, as I probably much more camera than I need, because as she gets older, I want to make sure we have like pictures of her at various stages of life. And she's just kind of a lump right now, so she's not that very interesting to photograph. But as she gets older, she's moving around. Like, I want to know, how can I shoot some, like, a subject that's moving very quickly. Like, I like what to do about light. Like, I bought some cheap like 5-in-1 diffuser reflector things that are like amazing. We even use them when we're doing her like monthly with the iPhone just to get more light on her. But like the goal for me is I want to document my daughter's childhood, and
Mm-hmm.
that my goal is exactly that narrow. We've tried to do photo walks in the past, and frankly, I don't have the patience. I'm impressed for the people both who can go out there and see things, and also are willing to go back through their photos and do the post processing to get it to the point. Like I've got 17,000 photos in my library, and I haven't looked at 90% of them after I took the picture. And luckily, like tagging in years and stuff, I can kind of get to what I want. But I don't anticipate being any more than wanting to take photos of my kids. So my question to you is, if I am earnest and motivated in that frame, am I someone who you want to serve, or is it someone who is looking for photography uh, as like more of a hobby? Like I have a problem to solve that's very narrow
Yeah.
that I could, but it's really a function of do my goals comport with the goals of the people you're trying to help?
I think it's fairly clear to me that you would, in your particular use case, would actually fall outside the group. So anytime, if and because I mean, I take photo. I have a 6 month old for people that are watching. Feels weird to address an unseen audience when we're just talking, but uh, and yeah, I take pictures of her, but those are very different types of pictures. Like those just have a sentimental quality, and yes, of course, like we all want the photographs to be good, right? Like we want the lighting to be nice and the skin tones to look good and whatever else. But there's just a certain kind of level of technical skill that you need in order to make a decent photo for the family scrapbook, so to speak. And so that's great. And I mean, there is certainly a skill, and I don't mean to underplay it. I think that it takes work to even get to a place where you can start to make better photos than just people are taking just with no thought on their phone, and that's certainly a valid goal. But I think what this service, as I'm imagining it, one thing I'm fairly clear on now is that would be for at least the tier of people that are one beyond that, which are shooting photography for, let's just vaguely call it, more of an artistic goals in mind, instead of just sentimental value in photographs or things like that, where it's photography that they may hope like someone beyond their immediate family would enjoy, right? Like, I mean, as wonderful as the photos of Clara that you will take, I'm sure, and I'll enjoy them as your cousin, and your mom and your dad will enjoy them and whatever. But probably like beyond that, and your family, like they don't have a ton of interest, right?
So if we can try to tease that out. So in artistic goals, the immediate thing that comes to my mind is this a place where I refine my technical skill? So what I'm trying to accomplish is like I am enabled in doing it, or is this a place where like the emphasis is more on expression? Like what narrative am I trying to like get across in the picture? Like those are not like completely separate, but like those, like if your goal is to help people become more expressive in their photography, you're going to end up in a very different place than if this is I want to be a very capable like technician in
Right.
photography. And the types of feedback you're going to push people towards are going to necessarily be different, and the measure of was this successful is a very different question.
That's huge, and so this idea of technical skill versus whatever else you want to call it, and I haven't found like a great word for it or phrase for it, but of course photography is technical in some sense. You need to understand the basics of photography. You need to be capable of producing an image that gets close to whatever your vision for it is. That doesn't even necessarily mean it's always in perfect focus or that the lighting is perfect or whatever, because of course art is art, and you can play with those things if that's what your vision is for them. But you at least need to be able to get to the point where technically you can make images that get somewhere close to what you had hoped or envisioned them to be. And that's hard. I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways, you know, especially with film, which I've been shooting the last couple of years, I'm still kind of working through a lot of that stuff. But at some point, you kind of get to that level, and then it's all about really finding your voice and your style and kind of, you know, what really makes you unique, and you're sort of feeling like you're now really kind of outpouring whatever that creative thing is that you have inside of you. And so there's really a pretty hard split. And one thing that I've talked a little bit about with Stephanie is, you know, I think there's actually potentially, as a thought exercise, room for things that kind of throw out the technical parts altogether. In fact, you know, when you look on some of these sites, like well, Percussion, which is dead now, but I mean, there are Facebook groups where people like give each other critique on photos. There's a big subreddit where people do critiques. A lot of it comes down to technical critiques, because that's the stuff that's sort of immediate and easy to engage with. It's like, well, you know, it's a little out of focus here, or the colors are a little off, or, you know, that kind of stuff.
But you can nudge, like, what my point is, you can nudge that, because it may be,
Right.
and I don't know this because this is not an area I've spent a lot of time in. It may be that the best way to get better at photography is to keep at it, and it may be that you don't know you may not know what and your high ISO is going to do beyond like making it noisy, or your like f-stop or your exposure. You may not know those things, and you may just sort of get better at them just because you find your own way. Like, it's the difference between sort of playing piano by ear and getting much better at like reading music. I'm somebody who I can hack out most major and minor chords, and I can play dozens of songs, but I can't even like read the music for Hot Cross Buns. And like, if I was coming, like by analogy, if I was coming to a community for someone like me, I take sort of my music more seriously than I take my photography. I'd be drawn to something that is celebrating my wins, or saying, hey, like, what you did right there, you may not know, but that the reason, that like extra bump, that's called syncopation, and you can like, that opens the door for X, Y, and Z. And so the bread, like how people are coming in and what's like making them engage, because is like a question you want to have like a stake in the ground, even if it changes, like because you ultimately, and we've talked about this offline, like I prefer to have sort of a falsifiable worldview of like, this is what I believe to be true, or this is what I'm trying to make true, and being willing to be surprised. But it's easier when you have that, like, the thing that you're trying to reconcile and evolve, and it also gives you an idea of the things you're trying to measure, because like it's much better to come with a worldview that you're trying to like create measurements for, than to like back your way into a picture of things based on like thing signal you're seeing, because like the signal versus noise, I think it's hard to do that in an inductive way when you're dealing with something that can go with the wide swath of solutions that you can come to with software. Trying to back your way into a larger view is a lot harder than starting with one and then refining it, even if it's wildly off track.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. And that idea of falsifiability is, I think, really important. And I think that's something that these other sites, at least the ones that are sort of community sites that have been built for photographers, get wrong. Like 500 pics, I've learned that that's what people call it, not pixels, 500 pics, which makes a lot more sense as a photography site. You know, it just seems fairly thoughtless. So it doesn't seem like they're taking really any sort of stance. It's just sort of the generic stuff that you would see, right? I mean, there's sort of a feed of like popular images, and that can be kind of anything. You can follow people, you can leave comments. It's marketed to photographers, yes, and there are some kind of, you know, it will tell you the technical details of photos that were posted, which is not something that happens on Instagram, for instance, or things like that. But beyond just sort of those kind of surface level things, they're not taking, in my opinion, any real stance like you're talking about here. Like they don't really push anything in any one direction. They just sort of say, well, okay, here's a big group of people, and we're going to give you sort of the basic tools for interaction that have become very conventional in, the social media kind of world, and like, have at it. Like, hopefully, do your best, and like, and I think that's about as far as the sort of thoughtfulness that I see in like that product specifically, I guess, and others that have existed before, even like this defunct Focussion site that I was looking at. So that's another question. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, as far as like creating more of a niche product to start with versus having it be more wide and trying to create those segmentations within the product itself.
So knowing very little about photography, it's hard for me to answer that right now in a vacuum, because it feels like the only goals we've teased out so far is this is a place where people can either share or like engage with photography in a way that fosters that artistic photography. And that's kind of as narrow as we've gotten so far. So my question would be, if we could supplement those goals, then the question is, and I'll just make something up in a minute and then we can kind of talk about it, but how much of how much of either the expressive aspect or the technical aspect of photography is shared between portraiture and street photography and landscapes and all the other, like, I don't know what the taxonomy is because I'm not that into photography, but to it would my question would be is how much of those overlap in fostering like more artistic photography in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and in the life of each person in the community. The more they overlap, the more I think there's room to have them coexist, and then if in those fringes they can kind of, you whether you want to specialize in them, that's really a question going down to the details. But I think it's hard to validate that without sort of filling out those goals. So
Yeah.
let's say let's just make some up just for the sake of conversation. So we want to
Well, I know
like
a few of them. I guess I haven't stated them explicitly. I mean, one is definitely inspiration. Now, here's the thing about inspiration as a goal, though. Like, Instagram does pretty damn well at inspiration, because I can go on there and, almost everybody's on Instagram that's producing any kind of visual work these days. And I can go on there and follow everyone and, see a stream of their work. So just for the pure kind of consumption aspect of inspiration, just to see it and sort of take it in, um, although it is a goal, and I think that probably no product like the one that I'm talking about can exist without some element of inspiration being built in there. It's certainly not going to be able to compete with something like Instagram when we just talk about the breadth and volume and quality of things to be inspired by.
well, and I think there's some things you can help to contextualize that inspiration. So I think if you add like it could be inspiration for, I'm going to go after these types of subjects, or I'm going to shoot in this type of place, or like I think a softer one that's not specific, but I'd imagine if I were starting something like this, I would want one, like give people a little more nudge to take more photos, like something as simple as that. Like, I'm going to take more photos because I know they're not just going to stay on my camera roll, they're not just going to stay in Lightroom, they're going to go somewhere else. And whatever happens, that's sort of another question we can answer down the road. But if I think a successful community is that encouragement, whether through interaction or whether through actual like human encouragement to take more photos. I think related to that is not photography for photography's sake, but to get more joy out of the artistic aspects
Yes.
of photography. And so like inspiration, and encouragement and joy and whatnot. And I think these are really good, helpful things to sort of craft the norms for your community. We're here to encourage each other. We're here to help each other get better. We're here to maybe not directly inspire, but provide inspiration through our work and through our feedback, to the community at large. And I think one thing to that could sort of be an indicator of success, whether or not it's an actual metric, is like, are people post, like, as they evolve and engaging with their product, are they posting more pictures over time or fewer? Is there like a clear line where they trail off? And one thing that, if we're going down that road and we want to like frame that idea of getting too technical as like a trap that these other things fall into, that perhaps your interaction model can help with that. Like, maybe I don't put up one shot that you're critiquing. Maybe it's a shoot versus a shot. Here, I went out today, and whether it's flowers, even though you don't like them, or landscapes or whatever, here's my shoot. And that could, you could still fault for, okay, like, what did you do in post, or what did you emphasize? But like, it's now the unit doesn't favor like a pure technical, well, you obviously didn't keep your shutter long enough, or your ISO is too high and the noise is not really going for what you're going, blah blah blah. You can kind of look at it as a whole, and then what I can do to improve that may inspire someone else to go out, but I know on my next shoot I may like make adjustments. And it may be, and again, I don't know as much with photography as I know with music. I do know if I jump from guitar to piano and back and forth, even though those are wildly different, they do inspire me to kind of play around with them, even though I'm not like, even though they really in some ways only relate by analogy. And I see that idea of like pushing people towards those things where they're actually engaging in a way that is like towards these more, not fuzzy, but more like human like things, and also more expressive, the expressive side of things, which is not something we put a pin on, but I like did put a pinpoint on, but it's like seems like an opportunity where these other things have failed. And I because you don't want to just be like, you don't want a bunch of, it sounds like a failure would be that a bunch of photography nerds are telling you, whether nicely or not so nicely, you don't know how to use your camera, which is like not the point of making more artistic photography a thing that can be in the world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've thought back about on my experience with Instagram, the thing that actually stands out the most for me, as far as people leaving comments on some of my photos, there's a few times when someone in a photo that I posted said, "Hey, this is great. This really reminds me of X photographer." And then a couple of the cases that has happened, it's been, like brand name, like in the street photography world, at least, people that I didn't actually know at the time because I was new. And then of course, like, I'm Googling and looking at their work and saying, oh wow, like I love this because it's actually, they're right, there is some aspects of it like in my own work or whatever that I'm seeing. And so there was something to that as well, like of all the junk and all the stupid emoji comments and everything else, like those little interactions, I think, and I've tried to really reflect on that, and I think one, it was like, wow, someone actually saw this photo, and I don't mean that in just their eyes caught the light from it as it was flying by their timeline, but they actually saw it, digested it in some sense, and then gave me something, right? And it's just a little comment, just say, oh, hey, this reminds me of whoever's work. But that was exciting. And beyond that, it was educational because now I can go and like seek out that photographer, and that's how I found some of my favorite photographers. But that part of just knowing that someone saw it and thought about it for a second, long enough for it to make some sort of connection in their head, was really powerful. And so that's kind of something that I've thought about too, is maybe I throw out all of the technical stuff, like maybe it's not even about saying, hey, this is not really in focus, or like I don't really like the color palette here and any of that stuff, but maybe that emotional element, say, hey, what feeling does this evoke in you when you see this? And maybe that's part of the response that you put in if you're responding to something. Or does this remind you of any other photographers' work that you've seen? And maybe they're not professional, or maybe they're not big name photographers. Maybe there are other photographers just in the world, that you can make connections with. So those are the kind of things that have kind of been exciting to me as I've thought about it over the last week or so.
Well, and one thing that came to mind as you were talking that I think checks some of the boxes we're talking about is maybe, and this is like something I would not recommend, but just like an idea to beat up. Perhaps you don't have like pure binary, I liked it or I didn't. And perhaps you don't even have long form comments. Maybe you build, and this is just something, it's a solution, but just to talk about, like maybe tags, like people in the community tagging it is the main interaction. So I tag this as this is a good example of composition, or I tag this as this reminds me of this photographer, and maybe it's also that it's a good example of street photography, and you have that taxonomy in there too. But the idea is you're nudging people towards like in seeing and processing this photo, what is it evoking you? And it's open-ended because it's a tag, but it's narrow because you're trying to like say whether this is a good example or a bad example. What I like about this that sort of flips tags on their head. Traditionally, tags are used in like a one-player mode where I'm tagging my stuff or you're overloading your hashtags or whatnot. But the idea of I'm coming in here and I'm having sort of the like I could imagine as someone who never put a photo on there, getting a lot of satisfaction of going through and like tagging things that are interesting to me within a frame, like within some like realm. And that like I like the like in the same way like when you click links to Wikipedia and you don't know quite where they're going to lead. Like if I go down like whatever rabbit hole it might be on a tag, I might find a new tag and discover another tag, and I might end up in a place I wouldn't have, because there is sort of that cross-pollination because one photo represents many tags, which is the thought. And I could see that both being used for inspiration, but also giving someone a reason, like it gives you feedback because it's like, what did this inspire in the people who actually processed it? But it also gives you a way to engage that is like probably somewhat novel. That's just something that came to mind as you were talking. What I like about that is it narrows the universe of what you're nudging, like how answering the question, how do we interact as a community? And maybe there's other ways to engage in a higher resolution, but maybe you don't, maybe the social object of the album or the photo is not the place for that. And maybe there's some complementary place where people can like free of, we're talking about this thing, like connect as humans within the community. Now that increases the surface area of what your product is, but like there may be some middle ground you can find that does that. I have a feeling though that like at least at the outset, that narrowing on just street photography or just this or just that, not only is it not necessary, it may be too limited too fast, and you kind of like it doesn't allow the product to sort of like let the community help define what the product is and like what they're getting out of it. Not, and you want to have, that's a balance, right? You want to sort of like have some influence over where it goes, but you also want to leave enough room for humanity to come out and people tell you through their actions like what's working and what isn't on those broader goals of people like having more artistic photography, taking more photos, like finding joy in it and finding people who like share those same values about photography.
All right, Jesse. Well, you've given me a lot to think about. Very insightful stuff, as always. I'm sure I'll be asking you to do this again sometime soon. So thank you.
Yeah, good luck.